Welcome to PhD&D, everyone. I'm Dr. Bowers, and not long ago, my YouTube colleague Gabriel Jensen, who runs an excellent Ravenloft channel called Hour of the Raven, both in English and Portuguese, sent me a little work that he put together with some of his colleagues. It's called Dread Space, and it's an attempt to merge old Ravenloft lore with new Ravenloft lore and with old Spelljammer lore. He gave me a copy, and it's really interesting, and asked me to review it. It took me a while to get to the review. I think he actually gave it to me back in November. But I read through it, I had some thoughts on it, and I thought I'd present those thoughts here now. Before going any further, however, be sure that you visit the Hour of the Raven and give it a like or a subscribe or hit that bell. The channel is really great when it comes to exposition of old Ravenloft lore and setting and characters and Dark Lords. I'm a Ravenloft guy myself, so obviously I enjoy it. Also, I should mention, yes, I did get a copy of this for free, but that doesn't really affect my review. Overall, before I go into any details, I would say that this product is very good. Especially if you're looking for ideas for settings and adventures that merge Spelljammer with Ravenloft, I would get this. It's certainly worth its price over on DM's Guild. And so overall, I would give it a positive review. I want to make that clear, because I do have some critical things to say about it, and I want to be honest about those. My criticism is not intended to detract from or in any way contradict my recommendation. Dread Space covers 10 Ravenloft domains, 8 of which are brand new. I'm going to start at the beginning and just go through to the end. The collection of domains featured in this work are collectively called Dread Space, and we get a little introduction about how you might want to run Dread Space. On one hand, you might try to say each of these domains are part of a larger whole, and you can travel from one to another without any difficulty. Well, without any difficulty besides monsters. The other way to run it, of course, is to say that each domain within the Dread Space is inaccessible to the others because they're all mist-bound and separate. I think it's helpful for the introduction to distinguish these two ways of going about Dread Space, so that was pretty cool. And then we get a bit of DM advice, which I found a little curious. The advice says that when running adventures set in these Dread Space realms, don't focus on killing or defeating the Dark Lord. And when I first read this, I agreed with it. I thought, yeah, there are quite a few, perhaps too many, Ravenloft adventures, or the only way to escape is to face and defeat the Dark Lord. So at first I read that, and I think, yeah, that makes sense. But then, as I read later through the work, I found that there's a lot of stat blocks that are very, very high CR. There's like a CR 29 stat block, and a 21 and a 22. And when I see a high challenge rating stat block, the first thing I think is, how do I pitch this to my players? A low challenge rating stat block, like a skeleton or a goblin or whatever, you can, throw that at any old PC or group of PCs, and you'll know more or less what to do with it. But if something is CR 29 and it has all kinds of crazy abilities, the first thing I think is, I need some instruction. I need some help. How do I feature this in the culmination of an adventure where the PCs fight this thing? Those are the questions that come to mind when I see a high CR stat block. So I thought that this advice was weird because it was kind of contradictory, right? On one hand, it says, don't let the PCs fight the Dark Lords. Don't have the PCs fight the Dark Lords. But then on the other hand, there's, here are the stat blocks for these Dark Lords, so your PCs can fight them. So I just wanted to flag that as kind of like a little confusing in retrospect. After that, we get a section on the Aperusa. These are, I guess, for lack of a better term, space Vistani. I looked this up, and I guess they come from the original Spelljammer setting, and they were a rogue kit. Now, when they were featured as a rogue kit, there's no way around this. They were characterized with some problematic tropes and stereotypes involving the roguish Romani. I didn't think that the section on the Aperusa here was like indulgent in this or bad in this way, but I didn't get the reassurance from the authors that they were aware of the potential problems here. I think if you're going to have this section at all, it would be better if there was at least some acknowledgement given to these issues. I would have felt better as a reader, sort of knowing that the authors were aware of the problems associated with lifting this old Rogue's kit from 2nd edition. Okay, so let's get on to the domains. First, we get 8 pages on Blootspur. This is a really fun section that merges what we know about Blootspur from Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft in 5th edition with some of the geography and features of Blootspur back in 2nd edition from adventures like Thoughts of Darkness. We also get a backstory for the god brain, which I thought was very cool. It's actually a powerful human psionicist who managed to brainwash the Illithid tadpole as it was eating his brain so that he could transfer his consciousness into the Illithid brain. It's neat. It's neat. It made me want to run an adventure involving that god brain. We also get some stats for that god brain, and we also get 8 adventure hooks, 4 of which connect Blutspur to other domains in Ravenloft, and 4 of which are just sort of cool sci-fi concepts. There's alien abduction, and there's like a Jules Verne from Earth to the Moon sort of thing. So overall, the Blutspur section was really fun. Up next, we get the Bone Reef. This was one of my favorite domains. It's a new domain, and I want to say something about it. The domain lies behind a toxic nebula called the Amaranthine Shroud. And beyond that nebula, there's a star, and gathered around the star are all these skeletons of space whales. The space whales are called Kindori, and one of the twists is that the star that they're gathered around is not really a star, but some kind of great old one, some kind of eldritch alien power that just behaves like a star, at least for now. Hidden and nestled amongst the space whale corpses are countless stranded space pirate ships, all missing supplies and desperate and warring with each other over how to salvage and cobble together their rickety rockets. And although everybody wants to use parts from the space whale skeletons in order to repair their ships, nobody dares try because of the Dark Lord Valgra the Heartless, a vampire pirate, who feeds on those spacefarers who disobey her. We get a couple of locations, including a space pirate tavern called the Laughing Kindori. And I have to say, I love this domain. It's great. As soon as I read about it, my imagination was racing and I really wanted to run an adventure here. However, I was surprised that the Dark Lord's backstory didn't have more to do with those space whales. When you read the backstory for Valgra the Heartless, you find out that she was like a conquering pirate captain and killed lots of people, and because of her crimes, she became a Dark Lord, yada yada. But I was hoping that it was more like a Jacques Cousteau kind of thing. Like, what if Valgra the Heartless was actually an extremist conservationist, right? And in her past, all she wanted to do was save the space whales, you know? She just wanted to save the space whales. And in their defense, or perceived defense, she killed countless innocent people. And so, as a result, she became trapped in a domain where she is helpless to witness the countless suicides of space whales. All of the space whales are drawn towards this poisonous star to die, and then they just die there, and she can't stop it from happening. It's her nightmare. The only thing she can do, the only thing she can even try to do to affect the whole process, is to keep other space pirates' grimy mitts off of those sacred skeletons. That's why she doesn't want any pirates to fix their ships with space whale parts too, right? That's how I would pitch Valgra the Heartless. Not quite as just another, space vampire pirate or whatever. I would say that she's like a radical conservationist who was now tortured to witness the countless deaths of space whales that she cared so much about. I'd really like to do it that way, personally. But anyway, you can tell that I like this domain because I'm already writing fan fiction for it. The next domain is the Dread Destroyer, and I like it a lot. This is a combination of the Flying Dutchman, that ghost ship the sight of which would doom any sailor, and Moby Dick. The Dark Lord Admiral Helvim is a kind of Ahab figure who, once when sailing the Astral Sea, was injured by an astral dreadnought, and now forever hunts it and is unable to ever capture it. It's a traveling domain, so I guess the idea is you're out there in your Spelljammer ship and suddenly you catch sight of this Dread Destroyer, and oops, now you are caught up in the whole chase for this giant undead astral dreadnought called the Evil Eye. I think that's what it's called. Nope, it's the Elder Eye, excuse me. This domain is simple but imaginative, and it was very clear what the fun was all about as soon as I took a look at it. The next domain, Hysterica, is very, very similar to the Ravenloft Carnival domain. Like the Ravenloft Carnival domain, Hysterica is a traveling domain. Like the Ravenloft Carnival domain, Hysterica is a circus-themed domain. Like the Ravenloft Carnival domain, there is a mechanic where if you visit Hysterica, you can be warped and turned into one of its permanent monstrous residents. The two main differences are first that Hysterica is more themed around big-top modern circuses, whereas Carnival is more like 19th century traveling wagon carnival circuses. And of course, Hysterica is in outer space. Now, there's nothing wrong with this domain. It's cool. I would just say that the problem is that it's already been done much better. This is not to say anything bad about what's here, but if you want a domain that's full of clowns and themed around circuses and circus evil and antics like that, check out Hecna by Hit Point Press. That's the real deal, I would say. This is cool, but unfortunately, while I was reading it, I was just constantly reminded of a better version that I'd played and loved and all of that. I think especially if you're into the space clowns from the Spelljammer setting, this is something that will serve you well. So there is that feature, which is cool. The next domain, Jaharkra, is an inhospitable red planet full of mind flayers, so in that sense it's like Blootspur, but these mind flayers are at war with Neogi, and really the domain isn't even about them. The planet Jaharkra causes people to become enraged. It emanates this magical power that makes people and creatures angry and violent. This has a number of interesting mechanical potentials. Barbarians might be in danger of losing their rages or spending them wantonly. Lycanthropes might find it difficult to stay in their human form, and so on. It's like the angry planet. But in addition to being the angry planet, there's two other features that make Jaharkra really interesting. One, it's a traveling domain and can just appear in the night sky of other planets and worlds. And two, when people see it in the night sky, what happens is they dream about it. They have angry, violent nightmares about being on its surface. And when they die in those nightmares, when they die in their dreams, they die in real life. So that's very interesting. It's not like they actually go to the planet physically and become endangered. Instead, they see it passing in the sky and then are sort of abducted there subconsciously in their dreams, and then they die in their dreams. And it's really cool. It makes me think of that Lovecraftian entity, Groth, that red star that passes by planets, and when it does, it wakes up all the great old ones that are in those planets. One thing that I would maybe critique is this. Why isn't the planet itself the Dark Lord? As written, there are two Dark Lords of Jaharkra. One of them is a Mind Flayer leader, one of them is a Neogi leader, and they're at war and stuff. But given that the interesting thing is the planet itself, and what the planet does to you, and how the planet abducts you from your dreams, just make the planet the Dark Lord. I think that would be really cool. We would be taking a page from that 3.5 supplement, Elder Evils, the planet Atropos. There's that giant evil planet. Or like Hellstar Ramina, you know? I would make that one little change if I were running this domain. And again, you can tell I like this domain because I'm doing some fan fiction and making little adjustments. Really good stuff. The next domain we get is Chlor, and I absolutely love Chlor. I did a video on Chlor, link in the doobly-doo, and here what we get is a fleshed out version of Chlor that touches on some things that I neglected to think of. Here we get a version of Chlor that really fleshes out the horror of getting closer and closer and closer to the eye of Chlor, closer and closer to your doom. There's this set of stages of how time dilates more and more as the world that you're on in Chlor gets closer and closer to that central eye. I thought that was really cool. There's also some mechanical features about time affecting spells like haste and time stop and expeditious retreat. And we also get some ideas about how to stop the Eye of Chlor and a stat block for Chlor himself. He's a megalomaniacal artificer. I really like this ability that Chlor has in his stat block called Temporal Ray, where he zaps you and you immediately move back to where you were at the start of your previous turn. That's pretty cool. Overall, fun to read. The next domain is Knaras, and this is a domain where the domain and the Dark Lord are the same. The idea is that this is a living ship. Well, not a living ship. It's an undead ship. The idea was at one point there was a living Spelljammer ship made from the body of a treant, right? So the ship itself was alive. And then what happened is the ship was corrupted by some kind of disease, and it decided to murder all of its crew. In the process of doing this, it became undead and also became a Dark Lord and a domain. The result is a giant undead plant monster that is shaped like a spelljamming ship and commands a crew of fungal-infested, pollinated slaves that used to be independent people that are its victims. It's very imaginative and interesting. One thing that confused me is that the stat block says that the size of this creature is huge, which at biggest is a 15-foot by 15-foot cube, but based on the description, I imagined it accommodating a full crew and being like a giant sailing ship, so maybe that was a typo. I thought I'd mention it. The next domain, Tarwasant, or Tarwasant, I have to be honest here. I love the core idea of the domain. I really do. This is a really, really cool idea. But it took a while for me to understand what the core idea was. I would say that the way this entry is written includes a lot of extraneous information that got in the way of seeing what the basic idea was. The basic idea is you have a planet which is divided into two inhospitable regions. One of those regions is a barren, desert-like, irradiated wasteland that is infested with giant slugs from outer space. Kind of like the worms of Arrakis or something. They're these giant, all-consuming slugs that live out in these wastes. The other part of the planet is a colossal, carnivorous jungle hive mind, like a mass of carnivorous plant monsters that all share the mind of the Dark Lord. And these plant monsters include a lot of pod plants that produce pod people. Now, there are human beings that eke out a living in the areas of greenery, but they do so dangerously and at their own risk. And I thought this was awesome. In addition to clearly being influenced by Dune and Swamp Thing, which the author mentions, I was also reminded of an old episode of Doctor Who called The Creature in the Pit that involved a similar sort of environment. And also an old cartoon called Wheeled Warriors that featured like a planet of plant monsters. See, I really like this domain. What tripped me up was that as soon as you start reading about the domain, what you're told about is a series of wars between elves and goblins, and the elves fought the goblins and the goblins fought the elves, and that was the first war. But then came another war where the elves fought the goblins and the goblins fought the elves, and an elf emerged among them who was especially genocidal in these wars, and this elf became the Dark Lord. I think that if you have giant space slugs and plant monsters and pod people, that's probably enough. I don't think there needs to be lots of information about the backstory with the Goblin Elf Wars. Or if there is, why not put it sort of at the end and sort of say like, well, here's what the place was like beforehand. But the main point of the place is desert with space slugs on one hand and, you know, man-eating sentient jungle on the other. Or at least that's how I was thinking of it. So I love this domain, but I found it a little harder to read because of a lot of extra lore that I didn't know how to connect to the basic idea, sort of thing. Then we get Varen, and this is a domain which, according to the author, is based around an old Spelljammer adventure called the Crystal Spheres. It starts Talan, who is a space vampire that's committed a lot of very, very evil crimes, including facilitating the deaths of entire planets. So the domain itself is basically what you would get if you mixed 30 Days of Night with Logan's Run. It's a really cool setting. What you have is a frozen planet that's overrun with vampires, and there's one little city called the Colony, where human beings and humanoids eke out a desperate living and they're trying to avoid vampires. And then maybe a couple of times per year, there's a spaceship that shows up, and it's the same spaceship with the same captain, Talan, and he always picks up some 20 people and takes them away. Every time he says that he's taking them away to be rescued, and he can only take so many at a time. But really, of course, he's eating them or doing something horrible with them. And so you have this sad situation where the residents of the only human colony on the vampire planet are desperately hoping to be picked up by this spaceship, even though the only thing that waits for them on the spaceship is the same death they're trying to avoid on the vampire planet. It's pretty cool. I like it. I like it a lot. Talayan himself is a CR16 vampire who has the ability to animate a body from up to a mile away. I thought that's cool, and at first I thought, oh, that's probably so that he can be in his spaceship hovering a mile above the planet and like raising corpses to attack PCs or something. But then I took a closer look and no, when he raises a corpse from a mile away, it automatically teleports to where he is. So in a way, it's kind of like the spell Summon Undead, but less powerful. But then he also has Summon Undead, so I don't know. I was confused by that little bit, but it's cool. Very cool. And finally, we get 12 pages on the Void Gate. I like this domain, but the name is very misleading. When I read the name The Void Gate, the first thing I thought of is some kind of interstellar gate or a sci-fi, dimensional doorway, right? Like the Stargate, right? I thought of that. But the Void Gate is not a gate, and it's also not a void. Instead, the Void Gate is the area of dread space that includes or encompasses all the other domains inside it, right? So that it's like the Void Gate is the punk rock vest, and all the other domains are the patches that are sewn onto it, sort of thing. So that's what it is. And it's not a void because it's full of all kinds of things. And it's those things that are interesting. There's a colossal orrery that is a model of a solar system, but it's the size of a solar system, and its constituent planets are like elemental dimensional nodes. It turns out that this solar system-sized apparatus is a piece of alien technology used to create galaxies. Whoever used it is long since gone and dead, but it's a fascinating, mysterious bit of cosmic horror. A world engine, as it were. There's also a desolate moon whose only city is both crescent-shaped and ruled by a tyrannical beholder. There's a star called the Beacon, which emits an anti-magic field for millions of miles around, and as a result there's all these crashed, shipwrecked Spelljammer ships just gathered around helplessly in its orbit. There's also a field of asteroids, and the asteroids are all little chunks of once inhabited planets that horrifically smashed against each other, and many of those asteroids have weird eldritch cyclopean ruins on them. And there's an evil moon-sized space library where the domain's Dark Lord, a wizardly giant, does research into cosmic and arcane experiments. I read this domain as a collection of really fun ideas for sci-fi horror space adventures. Each one of the locations is kind of like a mini campaign setting unto itself. I would say that in addition to cosmic horror, this domain does also evoke dark fantasy. If you've got beholders and wizard giants, it's good to run that as not only something in outer space, but also something in outer space and fantastic. And that's the end of Dread Space. Overall, it's really fun. It has a lot of creative ideas that I would be excited to use at my own table. I would also say that the layout design is very nice. It has very cool layout. If Bruce Springsteen recorded Born to Layout, then whoever did the layout would probably be on its cover. As far as the shortcomings, I would say the section on the space Vistani was unnecessary. Some of the Dark Lord's biographies went on a lot longer than they needed to, and a couple of the domains I think had some extraneous information which made it more difficult to understand what the point of the domain was supposed to be. On the technical side, there are a few spelling and grammatical mistakes. I'm sure those can be cleaned up easily enough. More of a concern, I would say, is the use of AI art. Not because of the ethics of the thing, although that is a topic. It's more that not all of the AI-generated art that this product uses is equally good. The larger landscape establishing shots sort of illustrations are pretty solid, but most of the portraits, I think, are wanting. Like this doesn't look like a hippo person. Come on, let's just be honest. But, that's just one little shortcoming. The point of this supplement, of course, is the information. And that is really cool. So anyway, there's my review of Dread Space, the mashup of Ravenloft and Spelljammer. I'll put a link to it down in the doodly-doo, along with links to the various authors' other pages and YouTube channels. So check that out if you're interested. Thanks very much for watching, and I've got more videos coming up soon.